I'm Captain Sanchez, and I earned my medals the hard way. For years, I propped up my family and kept the peace. But when my brother Justin tossed my ribbons into the trash on Veterans Day and called me a coward, I made a choice that changed everything. Ever been dismissed or humiliated by someone you'd bled for? Tell me in the comments, you're not alone. Before I dive in, drop where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself after a betrayal, hit like and subscribe for more true stories about boundaries and reclaiming your worth. What happened next might surprise you. The first signs weren't dramatic. They never are. My brother Justin would make these little comments when I came home on leave, nothing you could call him out on directly. When neighbors thanked me for my service at the grocery store or the gas station, he'd roll his eyes just enough for me to see. When I wore my dress uniform to our cousin's wedding, he whispered to someone about showboating. Small cuts, but cuts nonetheless. Our father encouraged it in his way. At family dinners, he'd compare us constantly. Justin was the tough one, the one who didn't need validation from strangers. I was too soft, apparently, for choosing the military over staying home and working construction like they did. The old man would lean back in his chair and shake his head when I talked about my deployments, as if my service overseas was some kind of elaborate vacation I'd taken at taxpayer expense. Real men don't need medals to prove themselves, he'd say, cutting into his steak with unnecessary force. Justin would nod along, emboldened by the support. They had this whole narrative worked out where I was the weak one, the one who ran away to play soldier while they handled real work at home. I told myself it was just family dynamics. Brothers give each other grief. Fathers have their favorites. It's normal, right? But there was something underneath their jokes that felt different from regular sibling rivalry. There was genuine contempt there, a real belief that my service meant less than their approval. That I was performing patriotism instead of living it. The comments got sharper after my second deployment. Justin had gotten married while I was overseas, and I'd missed the bachelor party. When I apologized, he shrugged and said, "Wouldn't have mattered anyway. You would have just talked about yourself the whole time." My father laughed and clapped Justin on the shoulder. I stood there holding a beer I suddenly didn't want to drink. At Justin's wedding reception, the DJ announced military members in attendance and asked us to stand for recognition. I stayed seated. Not because I was ashamed of my service, but because I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for me to embarrass them by accepting applause they thought I didn't deserve. Later, Justin's new wife asked me why I didn't stand. Before I could answer, Justin jumped in. "He's modest," he said, but his tone suggested the opposite. "Doesn't like making a scene." My father laughed into his whiskey. That's not the word I'd use. I started noticing things I'd missed before. How they'd changed the subject when I mentioned my unit or talked about guys I'd served with. How they'd go quiet when war coverage came on the news, as if my presence made them uncomfortable. How they never asked about my deployments beyond the surface level, never wanted to know what I'd actually done or seen. The medals became a particular source of tension. I kept them in a shadow box in my bedroom at my apartment, nothing flashy, just a standard military display. But when family visited, Justin would stare at it like it personally offended him. Once, when he'd had a few beers, he asked if I'd actually earned those or if they'd just hand them out for showing up. I should have called him out then. Should have made him explain what he meant. Instead, I deflected with a joke about military bureaucracy, tried to keep things light. I was still operating under the assumption that we were family, that underneath the needling was some basic level of respect and love. The unease grew over months. Every leave, every holiday, every family gathering became a minefield. They'd make plans without including me, then act surprised when I felt left out. They'd reference conversations I wasn't part of, inside jokes that specifically excluded me. My father would tell stories about Justin's work accomplishments, but never mention my commendations or promotions. What really got to me was how they treated other veterans. When Justin's neighbor, an older guy who'd served in Vietnam, came over for barbecues, they were all respect and gratitude. They'd listen to his stories with genuine interest, thank him for his service with real sincerity. But with me, their own flesh and blood, every gesture of military pride was met with skepticism or mockery. I started making excuses to avoid family events. It was easier than dealing with the constant low-level hostility. But that only seemed to confirm their narrative about me being weak, being unable to handle a little ribbing. Justin would call and leave voicemails that sounded concerned, but carried an undercurrent of satisfaction. Come on, man. Don't be so sensitive. We're just messing with you. The breaking point was building for months before it actually arrived. Every dismissed accomplishment, every eye roll, every moment they made me feel like my service was something to be ashamed of instead of proud of. I kept telling myself that family was family, that their opinion shouldn't matter more than my brothers-in-arms or my commanding officers or the people I'd served with who understood what we'd all sacrificed. But it did matter. More than I wanted to admit. These were the people who were supposed to have my back unconditionally. These were the people whose respect I'd been trying to earn my entire adult life. And slowly, painfully, I was realizing that nothing I did would ever be enough for them. The problem wasn't my service or my medals or my pride. The problem was that they needed me to be less than them to feel good about themselves. That realization should have freed me. Should have made me stop caring about their approval. Instead, it just made the weight heavier. I was carrying the burden of their expectations along with everything else, and I was starting to buckle under it. Something had to give. I just didn't know yet what it would be. The night before Veterans Day, I lay in my bed staring at that shadow box and wondering if they were right. If I was just playing dress-up, pretending to be something I wasn't. If the medals really were just pieces of metal that didn't mean anything to anyone who mattered. It was the lowest I'd felt in years, lower even than my worst days downrange. I should have known then that things were about to get much worse before they got better. Veterans Day started like any other family gathering. My father had invited everyone over for his traditional barbecue, a November tradition that made no sense given the weather, but that he insisted on every year. I brought potato salad and a six-pack, same as always. Justin and his wife were already there when I arrived, along with a couple of our father's friends from work. The conversation was normal enough at first. Football, work, the usual complaints about politicians and weather. I participated when spoken to, contributed what I could, tried to keep things easy. But I could feel the tension underneath, the way they all seemed to be waiting for something. After we ate, our father's friend Tom started talking about his son who was thinking about enlisting. He asked me about basic training, about what to expect, treating me like I might actually know something useful. For a few minutes, it felt good to be the expert in the room, to have my experience valued and sought out. That's when Justin jumped in. Better make sure he's tough enough first, he said, looking directly at me. Military's not for everyone. The comment hung in the air like smoke. Tom looked confused, glancing between us. My father had gone very still, and I could feel his attention focusing on the conversation in a way that made my stomach tighten. What do you mean? Tom asked. Justin shrugged, taking a long pull from his beer. Just saying. Some people join up thinking it'll make them heroes. But you can't fake being brave. I felt my face get hot. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, man. Just making conversation. But he was smiling now, and I could see our father watching with interest, waiting to see how I'd handle it. I should have let it go. Should have changed the subject or made an excuse to leave. Instead, I made the mistake of trying to defend myself. I think I've proven myself plenty. Have you? Justin's voice was casual, but his eyes had gone hard. Because from where I sit, you spent most of your deployments behind a desk. That wasn't true, and he knew it wasn't true. I'd been infantry, had seen actual combat, had the scars to prove it. But suddenly I was explaining myself, trying to justify my service to my little brother who'd never spent a day in uniform. You don't know what you're talking about, I said, hating how defensive I sounded. Don't I? Justin stood up, and I could tell he'd been planning this moment, had been working up to it for months or maybe years. Because I've been hearing stories, brother. Stories about how you spent most of your time in the green zone, filing paperwork and staying safe, while other guys did the real fighting. The room had gone completely quiet. Tom was staring at his hands, clearly uncomfortable. My father was watching like this was entertainment. That's not true, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to me. Isn't it? Justin walked over to the mantel where I'd placed my shadow box earlier, a gesture I'd thought was respectful, but now realized was a mistake. He picked it up, hefting it like he was weighing its worth. All these medals, he said. For what? Showing up? Following orders? Doing the bare minimum and getting rewarded for it. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. Put that down. Or what? He was enjoying this now, playing to our father's obvious approval. You'll report me? File a complaint. Justin. My voice was warning now, but he was past listening. You know what I think? He was holding the shadow box higher now, like he was examining it for flaws. I think these don't mean anything. I think they're just participation trophies for people who need everyone else to tell them they're special. Put it down. I took a step toward him. You want to know what real courage is? Justin's voice was getting louder, more animated. Real courage is staying home and taking care of your family. Real courage is working every day at a job you hate to pay bills and support people who depend on you. Real courage isn't running away to play hero in someone else's war. Our father was nodding along now, encouraging him. Tom was looking at the door like he wanted to escape. Justin's wife was staring at her phone, pretending not to hear. You're drunk, I said, trying to de-escalate. Just put the medals back and let's drop it. Am I? Justin laughed, and it was an ugly sound. Or am I just finally saying what everyone's been thinking? He looked at our father, who raised his beer in a mock toast. Go ahead, son. Tell him the truth. That's when I knew this wasn't spontaneous. This was planned. They'd been building up to this moment, maybe for months. This was an execution, and I was the condemned. Justin turned back to me, holding the shadow box with deliberate carelessness. The truth is, you don't deserve these. The truth is, you're not a hero. You're just a coward who ran away from real life and convinced yourself it was noble. And then, while I watched in stunned silence, he opened the box and dumped my medals into the trash can beside our father's chair. The ribbons fluttered down like dying birds. The bronze and silver hit the bottom with small, hollow sounds. There, he said, setting the empty box back on the mantel. That's where they belong. Our father laughed. Actually laughed, like this was the funniest thing he'd seen in years. About time someone said it. I stood there, frozen, staring at the trash can where my service record had just been thrown away like garbage. Every commendation, every recognition of my sacrifice and dedication and courage, dismissed and discarded by the two people whose opinion I'd spent years trying to earn. I didn't say anything. Couldn't say anything. My throat had closed up, and my vision had gone strange around the edges. I just stood there, silent, absorbing the humiliation and the revelation that everything I'd believed about my family was wrong. That night, after everyone had left and I'd retrieved my medals from the trash and driven home in silence, I sat in my kitchen and made one phone call. It was to a number I hadn't used in 2 years, a contact I'd hoped I'd never need again. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Pentagon Personnel Command, Colonel Harrison speaking. Sir, I said, my voice steady for the first time all day. This is Captain Sanchez. I need to discuss a personnel transfer. Growing up, Justin had been the golden child. 3 years younger than me, better looking, more charming, naturally gifted at everything he touched. Sports, school, girls, it all came easy to him in a way it never did for me. I was the older brother who had to work for everything, who studied harder and practiced longer just to keep up. But I didn't resent him for it. If anything, I protected him. When he got in trouble at school, I took the blame. When he crashed Dad's truck, I said I'd been driving. When he got caught drinking at 16, I covered for him and took the grounding. I thought that's what big brothers did. The military had been my way of finding something that was mine, something I was good at that didn't depend on comparison to Justin. Boot camp, advanced training, leadership school, I excelled in ways I never had at home. For the first time in my life, I was the one people looked up to, the one they counted on. I'd send letters home from my deployments, trying to share that world with my family. I'd write to Justin about the guys in my unit, about the missions we ran, about the weird little moments of beauty you find in ugly places. I'd send pictures of sunsets over the desert, of local kids we'd help with school supplies, of the makeshift gym we'd built on our forward operating base. His responses, when they came, were always short. Updates about his job, his girlfriend, local gossip. Never questions about my experiences, never curiosity about the world I was living in. I told myself he was just busy, just not much of a writer. I didn't want to see what was really happening. When I'd come home on leave, I'd bring gifts. Local crafts, interesting souvenirs, things I thought would help them understand where I'd been and what I'd seen. Justin would thank me politely and put them aside, never to be mentioned again. The wooden chess set I'd bought in Afghanistan ended up in our father's garage, covered in dust. The silver bracelet I'd found in a Baghdad market for Justin's girlfriend disappeared entirely. I sent money home too. Not because they asked for it, but because I could. I was single, living on base, with combat pay piling up in an account I rarely touched. When Justin wanted to propose, but couldn't afford a ring, I wired him $2,000. When our father's truck needed major repairs, I covered it. When they wanted to take a family vacation the summer I was deployed, I sent enough to cover the whole trip. They never asked where the money came from, never acknowledged the sacrifice it represented. I was living in a trailer in the desert, eating MREs and sweating through 120-degree days, but I was happy to share what I had with the people I loved. That's what family did, I thought. That's what my service meant, the ability to provide for and protect the people who mattered most. The irony is that I'd chosen infantry because I wanted to honor them. I could have gone into communications or logistics, could have picked a safer specialty that would have kept me away from the fighting. But I wanted to be the kind of soldier they could be proud of. I wanted to earn their respect the hard way, through real courage and real sacrifice. My first firefight, I thought about them. Pinned down behind a concrete barrier with bullets snapping overhead, I thought about Justin and wondered if he'd be proud of me for not running, for staying calm and returning fire and getting my squad out of the kill zone. I thought about our father and whether this would finally prove to him that I wasn't soft, that I was tough enough to be his son. I earned my first medal that day. Bronze Star with V device for valor, for leading a counterattack that broke up an ambush and saved 3 wounded soldiers. When I called home to tell them about it, Justin was out and our father was busy. I left a message with Mom, who said she was proud but didn't really understand what I was talking about. That became the pattern. Every achievement, every recognition, every moment of genuine heroism was met with polite disinterest or outright skepticism. When I made sergeant ahead of schedule, Justin asked if they were just promoting everyone these days. When I was selected for Ranger School, our father wondered if it was really worth the effort since I was already in the Army. The worst part was how they treated the other families on our street whose sons were deployed. Mrs. Peterson, whose boy was serving in Korea, got regular visits and genuine concern for her son's welfare. The Johnsons, whose twin boys were both Marines, were treated like local celebrities when the boys came home on leave. But my service was somehow different, somehow less worthy of their pride and attention. I started to wonder if there was something wrong with me, some fundamental flaw that made my sacrifices less meaningful than other people's. Maybe I wasn't brave enough, wasn't dedicated enough, wasn't worthy of the uniform I wore. Maybe Justin and Dad could see something in me that I couldn't see in myself. The second deployment was harder. Not because of the mission or the conditions, but because I was fighting a war on 2 fronts, against the enemy overseas and against my own family's indifference at home. Letters from home stopped coming entirely. Phone calls became perfunctory updates about weather and work. Care packages never materialized, even though I'd see other soldiers getting regular shipments of cookies and magazines and reminders that people at home were thinking about them. I threw myself into my duties with desperate intensity, trying to become the soldier I thought they wanted me to be. I volunteered for dangerous missions, took point on patrols, pushed myself to be braver and tougher and more committed than anyone else in my unit. If I couldn't earn my family's respect through normal service, maybe I could earn it through exceptional service. My commanding officer noticed. "Sanchez, you're going to burn yourself out," he told me after I'd volunteered for my 4th consecutive night patrol. "Nobody expects you to win the war single-handed." But that's exactly what I was trying to do. I was trying to win a war that would finally prove to Justin and Dad that I was worth their pride. I was fighting for a victory that would make them look at me the way they looked at other veterans, with genuine respect and admiration. The Bronze Star became a Silver Star. The Silver Star was followed by a Purple Heart after shrapnel from an IED opened up my left shoulder and left me with permanent nerve damage. Each medal, each recognition, each proof of my courage and dedication was something I imagined showing them, something that would finally bridge the gap between their expectations and my reality. But when I came home with a chest full of ribbons and a limp that would never fully heal, nothing had changed. They were polite about my injuries, sympathetic in a distant way, but there was no pride, no recognition that I'd given everything I had in service to something bigger than myself. Justin had gotten married while I was recovering in Germany. They'd sent me a wedding photo but hadn't delayed the ceremony for my return. "We didn't want to wait," Mom explained, "since we didn't know when you'd be back to normal." Normal. As if what I'd been doing wasn't normal, wasn't real life, wasn't worth organizing their lives around. That's when I began to understand that this wasn't about anything I'd done or failed to do. This was about who they needed me to be for their own self-image to make sense. They needed me to be the weak one, the one who'd run away, the one whose achievements were somehow lesser than theirs. My success threatened their narrative about themselves, and they couldn't allow it. The realization should have freed me from caring about their opinion. Instead, it made me angrier than I'd ever been. All those years of sacrifice, all those moments of genuine heroism, all those times I'd put their needs ahead of my own safety and comfort, none of it had mattered. They'd already decided who I was, and no amount of evidence to the contrary was going to change their minds. So when Justin threw my medals in the trash and called me a coward, when our father laughed at my humiliation, I finally understood that I'd been fighting the wrong war all along. The enemy wasn't overseas. The enemy was sitting at my father's dinner table, wearing my family's faces, and they'd already decided I was defeated. That realization, more than any firefight or explosion or moment of physical danger I'd faced in uniform, was what finally broke something in me. And once it was broken, I found I was capable of things I'd never imagined. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't sleep. I sat in my kitchen with my medals spread out on the table, each one telling a story Justin and our father had decided wasn't worth hearing. Purple Heart for the shrapnel that had torn up my shoulder and left me with nerve damage that would never fully heal. Bronze Star with V device for the day I'd carried 2 wounded soldiers out of a kill zone under fire. Silver Star for the mission where I'd single-handedly held off an insurgent attack while my unit evacuated civilians from a school. Each medal represented blood, sweat, sleepless nights, and moments when I'd chosen courage over safety. Each one was a testament to the man I'd become in the service of my country and, I'd thought, in honor of my family. But to Justin and our father, they were just pieces of metal, meaningless decorations that didn't deserve respect. I kept replaying the moment when Justin had dumped them in the trash. The casual cruelty of it, the way our father had laughed like it was entertainment. The way they'd looked at me afterward, not with guilt or remorse, but with satisfaction. Like they'd finally put me in my proper place. For years, I'd been telling myself that their opinion didn't matter. That I served for something bigger than family approval, for ideals and principles that transcended their small-minded resentments. But sitting alone in that kitchen at 3 in the morning, I had to admit the truth. Their opinion was the one that mattered most to me. These were the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, who were supposed to be proud of me regardless of what anyone else thought. Instead, they'd chosen Veterans Day, the one day of the year when the entire country supposedly honored military service, to tell me that my service was worthless. The symbolism was deliberate and cruel. They wanted me to know that not even the day dedicated to veterans could make them respect what I'd done. I thought about all the other veterans I knew, guys who'd come home to parades and celebrations and families who understood that their sons had given everything for their country. I thought about the older veterans I'd met at VA hospitals and American Legion halls, men who carried their service with quiet pride because their communities had honored their sacrifice. I'd never had that. I'd come home to skepticism, mockery, and indifference. I'd sacrificed pieces of myself in foreign deserts and mountains, and my own family couldn't be bothered to care. Worse than that, they actively resented my service, as if my courage somehow diminished their own choices to stay safe at home. The anger, when it finally came, was cold and clean. Not the hot rage of combat or the bitter fury of injustice, but something colder and more focused. A recognition that I'd been playing by rules that didn't apply to me, showing mercy to people who'd never shown me any. I'd spent my entire adult life trying to be the bigger person, trying to take their insults and dismissals with grace. I'd told myself that veterans were supposed to be above petty revenge, that our service meant we should turn the other cheek when civilians didn't understand or appreciate what we'd done. But what if that was wrong? What if the problem wasn't that I was too sensitive to their criticism, but that I was too passive in the face of their disrespect? What if the real failure wasn't my inability to earn their approval, but my willingness to keep trying after they'd shown me who they really were? I picked up the Silver Star, turning it over in my hands. The citation read like something from another person's life, for gallantry in action against an armed enemy of the United States. The words meant something to me, meant something to the soldiers I'd served with, meant something to the families of the men I'd saved. But they meant nothing to Justin and our father. That's when I realized I'd been thinking about this all wrong. I'd been treating their dismissal of my service as a personal failing, something I needed to overcome through better communication or more patience or deeper understanding of their perspective. But their contempt wasn't based on misunderstanding. It was based on a deliberate choice to diminish my achievements so they could feel better about their own limitations. Justin had never tested himself against real adversity. Our father had never put himself at risk for anything larger than his own comfort. They needed me to be weak so they could feel strong. They needed my service to be meaningless so their lack of service wouldn't feel like cowardice. The realization was liberating in a way I hadn't expected. For the first time in years, I stopped trying to see their point of view, stopped making excuses for their behavior, stopped hoping that the right words or gestures would finally make them understand. They understood perfectly. They just didn't care. I thought about my unit, about the men I'd served with who'd trusted me with their lives. I thought about the times I'd made split-second decisions that meant the difference between everyone going home and some of us coming back in boxes. I thought about the weight of command, the responsibility of leadership, the burden of making choices that other people would live or die by. Those men had never questioned my courage. They'd followed me into situations where following meant risking everything, and they'd done it because they knew I wouldn't ask them to go anywhere I wouldn't go first. Their respect had been earned through actions, not words. Their trust had been built on competence and courage, not family obligation. Why had I spent so many years caring more about the opinion of people who'd never been tested than about the judgment of people who'd seen me at my best and worst? Why had I given more weight to the contempt of civilians who'd never risked anything than to the respect of soldiers who'd trusted me with their lives? The phone call to Colonel Harrison wasn't about revenge, not exactly. It was about finally using the influence I'd earned through my service, finally leveraging the respect I'd gained from people who actually understood what sacrifice meant. Justin wanted to believe I was powerless, that my military service was just playing dress-up. It was time to show him how wrong he was. The conversation was brief and professional. A few questions about Justin's unit, his deployment status, his role in the upcoming rotation schedule. A casual mention that the front lines needed experienced personnel, that certain soldiers were being reassigned based on operational requirements. "Consider it done," Harrison said. "The orders will be cut tonight." I hung up and sat back in my chair, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not satisfaction, exactly, but a kind of clarity. For the first time since I'd come home, I'd stopped being the victim of other people's choices and started making choices of my own. Justin would learn what it meant to face real consequences. Our father would learn what it meant to watch someone he actually cared about deal with danger. And I would finally stop carrying the weight of their approval, stop measuring my worth by their narrow and self-serving standards. The medals on the table caught the kitchen light, each one reflecting years of decisions and sacrifices that had led to this moment. Tomorrow, Justin would wake up to new orders. By evening, he'd understand that his comfortable assumptions about power and influence had been based on ignorance. And I would finally be free of the need to prove myself to people who'd never been worthy of my respect in the first place. The call came at 0530 hours, while I was finishing my morning coffee. Justin's voice was tight with panic, all his usual arrogance stripped away by fear. What did you do? He said without preamble. Good morning to you too, brother. Don't. His voice cracked. Don't pretend this is normal. I got orders. Frontline deployment. Emergency reassignment. They're shipping me out in 72 hours. I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the silence stretch. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, normal people getting ready for normal jobs that didn't involve life or death decisions. Congratulations, I said finally. Sounds like they think you're ready for more responsibility. You know damn well this isn't normal. I could hear him breathing hard, probably pacing. Nobody gets reassigned like this. Not without warning, not without cause. Not unless someone with serious pull makes it happen. Maybe they just need good soldiers on the front lines. Cut the bullshit. Now he sounded angry instead of scared, which was more familiar. I know you did this. I know you made some calls. What calls could I possibly make? I'm just a coward with some meaningless medals, remember? The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. For the first time, Justin was understanding the difference between his assumptions about power and the reality of influence. He'd spent years believing that my military service was somehow lesser than his civilian job, that my connections were meaningless compared to his local network of drinking buddies and work contacts. Now he was learning that the world was bigger than our hometown, that there were hierarchies and systems of power that operated beyond his understanding or control. And he was learning that I had access to those systems in ways he'd never imagined. Please, he said, and the words sounded foreign in his mouth. Justin had never asked me for anything, had never acknowledged that I might have something he needed. Whatever I did, whatever you think I did, we can work it out. You don't have to do this. Do what? I didn't do anything. The hell you didn't. His voice was getting higher, more desperate. This is you. This is revenge for yesterday. But it's not fair, man. It's not proportional. You can't destroy my life over some stupid argument. Destroy your life? I laughed, and it felt good to hear genuine amusement in my voice for the first time in months. Justin, you're getting deployed. You're going to serve your country. I thought you'd be honored. I'm not ready for this. I haven't trained for combat operations. You haven't what? You haven't proven you're brave enough? You haven't shown that you're willing to sacrifice for something bigger than yourself. I set down my coffee cup harder than necessary. Welcome to the club, brother. This isn't funny. Now he was crying, actually crying, which should have made me feel guilty, but somehow didn't. I have a wife. I have responsibilities here. I can't just leave everything behind. Funny thing about the military, I said conversationally. When they say you're needed somewhere, you go. No matter what you're leaving behind. No matter what you'd rather be doing. That's what service means. I could hear him talking to someone else, probably his wife, his voice muffled as he covered the phone. When he came back, he sounded different. Smaller. What do you want? He asked. What do I have to do to fix this? That was the question I'd been waiting for. The acknowledgement that I had power he'd never recognized, that I could affect his life in ways he'd never imagined. For years, he'd treated me like a subordinate, someone whose opinions and achievements were inherently less important than his own. Now he was asking what I wanted, treating me like someone whose decisions mattered. I want you to understand something, I said. Those medals you threw in the trash? They represent times I chose duty over safety, courage over comfort. They represent moments when I could have stayed back, stayed safe, let someone else take the risk. But I didn't. I stepped up. Okay, he said quickly. Okay, I get it. You're brave. You're a hero. Is that what you want to hear? I want you to understand that this is what consequences look like. I was surprised by how calm my voice sounded, how controlled. You spent years treating my service like it was meaningless. Now you get to find out what that service actually means. Please. The word came out like a broken thing. I'm sorry. I'm sorry about the medals. I'm sorry about everything. But you can't do this. You can't use your connections to destroy my life because you're mad at me. I'm not destroying your life, Justin. I'm giving you an opportunity. The same opportunity one had, to prove you're worthy of respect. To show that you're willing to sacrifice for something bigger than your own comfort. That's not fair, and you know it. Fair. I laughed again, but this time it was bitter. Was it fair when you called me a coward in front of the family? Was it fair when Dad laughed while you threw away medals I earned with my blood? Was it fair when you decided my service was meaningless? That was just talk. This is real. This affects my actual life. My service was real too, Justin. My sacrifices were real. The nights I spent in foxholes thinking about home, the times I risked everything to save people I barely knew, the pieces of myself I left in foreign countries, all of that was real. I know, okay? I know. But this isn't the way to handle it. No? What's the right way? Should I have tried to explain myself better? Should I have been more patient while you and Dad made jokes about my service? Should I have just accepted that my family would never respect me? The line was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Defeated. What do you want me to say? That I was wrong? Fine. I was wrong. You want me to apologize? I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't understand. I'm sorry I was disrespectful. I'm sorry about everything. Just please don't do this to me. Apologies are just words, Justin. Service is action. You want forgiveness? Earn it. Do what I did. Step up when you're called. Prove you're worthy of the respect you've been demanding. This isn't about respect. This is about revenge. Maybe I admit it. Or maybe it's about justice. Maybe it's about time you learned what it means to put yourself at risk for something bigger than your own interests. I could hear him talking to someone else again, probably trying to figure out if there was some way to appeal the orders, some connection he could use to avoid deployment. The irony wasn't lost on me. He was trying to use influence to avoid service, while accusing me of using influence to force it. How long do I have to go? He asked when he came back to the phone. Standard deployment. 15 months, maybe 18, depending on operational needs. 15 months. He repeated it like he was trying to make sense of a foreign concept. Jesus Christ. Could be longer if you're needed. Could be shorter if you prove yourself quickly. Depends on how well you adapt to military life. I don't know how to do this, he said, and for the first time in our conversation, he sounded genuinely vulnerable instead of just scared. I don't know how to be a soldier. You'll learn. Everyone does. The question is whether you'll learn to be a good one or just learn to survive. The call ended without goodbyes. Within an hour, our father was at my door, red-faced and angrier than I'd seen him in years. He didn't bother knocking, just used the spare key I'd given him months earlier when I'd thought we were still family. What the hell is wrong with you? He shouted before he was fully inside. Your own brother? You're destroying your own brother. I was still in my kitchen, still drinking coffee, still feeling that strange calm that had settled over me after Justin's call. Good morning, Dad. Don't you dare act casual with me. Justin called me crying. Crying like a child. You've ruined his life. I've given him an opportunity to serve his country. I thought you'd be proud. Proud? His voice cracked. He's not cut out for that life. He's not like you. He's got a wife, responsibilities. He can't just run off and play soldier. Play soldier. I set down my cup carefully. That's what you think I did? Played? That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. Just like you meant it yesterday when you laughed while he threw my medals in the trash. Our father's anger faltered for just a moment, replaced by something that might have been guilt. But it passed quickly, overwhelmed by his panic about Justin's situation. This is different, he said. This is your family. You don't use your military connections to hurt family. Hurt him? Dad, I'm giving him the chance to become the man you've always said I wasn't. Tough, brave, willing to sacrifice for others. Isn't that what you wanted? Stop it. Just stop it and fix this. Call whoever you called and undo it. I can't do that. Can't or won't. Won't. The word hung between us like a challenge. Justin made choices yesterday. He chose to humiliate me, to dismiss my service, to throw away medals I earned through blood and sacrifice. Now he gets to live with the consequences. He was drunk. He was stupid. But he's your brother. My brother called me a coward on Veterans Day and threw my commendations in the trash while you laughed. What part of that sounds like brotherhood to you? Our father was quiet for a moment, maybe finally understanding that this wasn't just about yesterday's argument. This was about years of accumulated slights, dismissals, and contempt that had finally reached a breaking point. Okay, he said finally. Maybe we were wrong. Maybe we didn't appreciate what you did over there. But this isn't the way to handle it. What is the way, Dad? More patience? More understanding? More turning the other cheek while you and Justin make jokes about my service? We could have talked it out. Worked through it as a family. We tried that for years. Every time I tried to share my experiences, you changed the subject. Every time I mentioned my achievements, you minimized them. Every time I looked for your support, you gave it to Justin instead. He sat down heavily at my kitchen table, suddenly looking older than his 62 years. I didn't know you felt that way. You didn't want to know. It was easier to see me as the weak one, the one who ran away. It made you feel better about your own choices. That's not true, isn't it? When's the last time you asked me about my deployments? When's the last time you showed any real interest in what I did overseas? When's the last time you defended me when Justin made one of his jokes about my service? The silence stretched between us, filled with years of unasked questions and unexpressed pride. Finally, he looked up at me with something that might have been recognition. I was proud of you, he said quietly. I just didn't know how to show it. But you knew how to show pride in Justin. You knew how to brag about his work, his accomplishments, his life choices. Why was I different? Because you didn't need it. You were always so capable, so independent. Justin needed more support, more encouragement. I needed it too, Dad. I needed to know that my family respected my choices, that they saw value in my service. Instead, I got years of indifference and contempt. He was crying now, which should have affected me more than it did. But I'd moved beyond the point where his emotions could manipulate my decisions. Please, he said. Fix this. Justin's not strong enough for what you're putting him through. Then he'll get stronger. That's what military service does. It makes you stronger. You should be happy for him. You know that's not what this is about. No? What's it about then? It's about you using your power to hurt people who hurt you. It's about revenge, pure and simple. Maybe it is, I said. Or maybe it's about consequences. Maybe it's about showing Justin what real courage looks like. Maybe it's about time he learned that actions have results. He could die over there. So could I. So did a lot of guys I served with. But somehow their sacrifice was noble while mine was just playing dress up, right? Our father didn't answer, but his silence was answer enough. He never fully grasped that my service involved real danger, real sacrifice, real courage. To him, military service was something that happened to other people's children, not his own. I want you to leave now, I said finally. Justin's plane leaves in 2 days. I suggest you spend that time helping him prepare instead of trying to undo consequences he earned. This isn't over, he said, but there was no strength behind the threat. Yes, it is. Justin goes where the army sends him. He serves his tour. He learns what it means to put duty before comfort. And when he comes back, if he comes back, maybe he'll understand why those medals meant something. After he left, I sat alone in my kitchen and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not happiness exactly, but a kind of equilibrium. For the first time since coming home, I wasn't carrying the weight of their disapproval, wasn't trying to earn respect from people who'd already decided I wasn't worthy of it. The phone rang twice more that day. Justin's wife, crying and begging me to reconsider. One of our cousins, trying to mediate. I let them all go to voicemail. The decision had been made, the orders cut. Justin would learn what it meant to serve, and I would finally be free of the need to justify my own service to people who'd never understood its value. That evening, I took my medals out of their shadow box and spread them on the table one more time. Each one told a story of courage, sacrifice, and commitment that Justin and our father had dismissed as meaningless. But they weren't meaningless to the soldiers I'd served with, the families I'd helped protect, the country I'd sworn to defend. Their respect was the only respect that had ever really mattered. It had just taken me too long to realize it. The transformation didn't happen overnight. For weeks after Justin's deployment, I waited for the guilt to hit, for the remorse that would send me scrambling to undo what I'd done. It never came. Instead, what came was clarity, a gradual understanding of who I was when I stopped trying to be who they wanted me to be. Justin's first letters home were predictably bitter. Complaints about the heat, the conditions, the unfairness of his situation. He wrote to our parents, not to me, but I heard about the contents through Mom's worried phone calls. He was struggling with basic training requirements he'd never had to meet, with physical demands his civilian life hadn't prepared him for. "He sounds so angry," Mom said during one of our conversations. "So lost." "He'll adapt," I told her. "Everyone does, or they don't make it through." That's a terrible thing to say about your own brother. It's an honest thing to say. The military doesn't care about your feelings or your comfort level. It cares about whether you can do the job when people's lives depend on it. Our father stopped speaking to me entirely. When we passed each other at the grocery store or the gas station, he'd look right through me as if I didn't exist. I found I didn't mind as much as I'd expected. His approval had been conditional on my willingness to be less than Justin, and I was done with that bargain. Meanwhile, my own life began to change in ways I hadn't anticipated. Without the constant weight of family disappointment, I started engaging with the world differently. I joined a local veterans group, something I'd avoided before because I'd been too focused on earning respect at home to seek it elsewhere. The men in that group understood things my family never had. They knew what it meant to carry responsibility for other people's lives, to make split-second decisions with permanent consequences, to sacrifice personal comfort for abstract principles that somehow mattered more than individual desires. When I mentioned my Silver Star during one of our meetings, the response was immediate respect, genuine interest in the story behind it. These were men who understood that medals weren't participation trophies. They were recognition for moments when someone had chosen courage over safety, duty over self-preservation. "You led a counterattack?" asked Tom, a Vietnam veteran with 3 Purple Hearts. "How many men in your squad?" 12. "We were pinned down in an ambush. I flanked left while my sergeant took the right side." Classic maneuver. Risky though. Could have lost your whole unit if it went wrong. That's why it worked. They weren't expecting anyone to be aggressive in that situation. This was the conversation I'd wanted to have with Justin and our father for years, a discussion of tactics and leadership, of the decisions that separated effective soldiers from casualties. But they'd never been interested in the professional aspects of my service, only in whether it made them look good to their friends. I started volunteering at the VA hospital, spending time with soldiers who'd been wounded in recent deployments. Many of them were struggling with the same issues I'd faced: families who didn't understand their service, civilians who saw their sacrifices as either meaningless or excessive. "My dad keeps asking when I'm going to get over Afghanistan," one young soldier told me. He'd lost his left leg to an IED and was learning to walk again. Like it's something you just decide to move past. "Some people can't understand experiences they haven't had," I said. "That doesn't make your service any less valuable." Easy for you to say. You've got those medals. People can see what you accomplished. The medals don't make the service meaningful. The service makes the medals meaningful. You did your duty. You answered the call when your country needed you. That's what matters, whether anyone else recognizes it or not. It was advice I was finally learning to take myself. My service had value independent of my family's recognition. My courage had been tested in real situations with real consequences, and I'd passed those tests regardless of whether Justin and our father appreciated what that meant. 3 months into Justin's deployment, the angry letters stopped. In their place came shorter, more thoughtful communications that suggested he was beginning to understand things he never grasped as a civilian. He wrote about the responsibility he felt for the younger soldiers in his unit, about the weight of making decisions that affected other people's safety. "I'm starting to get why you were so serious all the time when you came back," he wrote to our parents. "This isn't a game. People can die if you make the wrong call." Mom shared that excerpt with me during one of our phone conversations, her voice hopeful. "He's maturing. He's learning to understand what you went through." "Good for him," I said, and meant it. Justin's understanding wouldn't change what had happened between us, but it might make him a better man. That was worth something, even if it didn't repair our relationship. Our father's silence continued, but I noticed changes in how he interacted with other veterans in town. He'd always been polite to them, respectful in a generic way, but now I saw him seeking them out at community events, asking questions about their service, showing genuine interest in their experiences. Mrs. Peterson, whose son had served in Korea, mentioned it to me at the post office. "Your father's been asking about David's deployment. Wants to understand what the boys go through over there. Says he never realized how hard it was on the families." I didn't respond, but I filed the information away. Our father was learning too, apparently. Learning what it meant to worry about someone in a war zone, learning to respect the sacrifices that military families made. It was too late for us, but maybe it would make him a better man as well. The real change, though, was in myself. I stopped checking my phone for messages from home, stopped hoping for acknowledgement that would never come. I built a life based on relationships with people who understood and valued what I'd accomplished, who saw my military service as an achievement rather than an escape. I started dating Sarah, a nurse at the VA hospital who'd served 2 tours as an Army medic. She understood things about military life that I'd never been able to explain to civilians. The bonds between soldiers, the weight of leadership, the difficulty of transitioning back to a world where most problems weren't life-or-death situations. "Your family sounds toxic," she said after I'd explained the situation with Justin and our father. "You're better off without that kind of negativity. They're still family. Family is supposed to support you, not tear you down. What they did to you is cruel, and you had every right to defend yourself." It was the first time anyone had framed my actions as self-defense rather than revenge. The distinction mattered more than I'd expected. I hadn't attacked Justin out of malice. I'd responded to years of attacks on my character, my service, and my worth as a person. 6 months into Justin's deployment, I received my first direct communication from him. Not a letter to our parents that I heard about secondhand, but an actual message addressed to me. "I owe you an apology," it began. "Not because of what you did to me, I still think that was wrong, but because of what I did to you. I understand now what it means to serve. I understand the weight of responsibility, the fear, the pride, the exhaustion. I understand why those medals meant something to you. I'm sorry I threw them away. I'm sorry I called you a coward. I was wrong." The letter went on for 3 pages, detailing his experiences, his growing understanding of military culture, his recognition of the sacrifices I'd made during my own deployments. It was the conversation I'd wanted to have with him for years, finally happening because he'd been forced to walk in my boots. I read it twice, then put it in a drawer. It was a good letter, an honest letter, but it didn't change the fundamental equation between us. Justin's respect had come too late and under duress. He understood my service now because he'd been forced to serve, not because he'd chosen to see me clearly. The apology was meaningful, but it didn't erase the years of contempt. It didn't undo the humiliation of Veterans Day. It didn't restore the trust that had been broken when he'd chosen cruelty over brotherhood. I wrote back a brief note acknowledging his letter and wishing him well in his remaining deployment. But I didn't forgive him, and I didn't invite him back into my life. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt with words alone. The Justin who would come home from deployment would be different from the Justin who'd thrown my medals in the trash. He'd be harder, more serious, marked by experiences that would change him permanently. But he'd also be someone who'd learned respect through force rather than choosing it freely. I could live with that outcome. He'd become a better man, and I'd become free of the need for his approval. We'd both won in our own ways. We just lost each other in the process. 8 months into Justin's deployment, I stopped expecting his return to change anything fundamental between us. The letters had continued, increasingly mature and thoughtful, but they felt like communications from a stranger who happened to share my last name. The brother who'd humiliated me was gone, replaced by someone shaped by experiences I'd orchestrated but wouldn't share. The family dynamics had shifted permanently. Our father, after months of cold silence, had begun making tentative attempts at reconciliation. Not apologies exactly, but acknowledgments that perhaps he'd misjudged my service, my character, my worth. Mom served as intermediary, passing along his comments about pride and regret, his growing understanding of what military families sacrificed. "He watches the news differently now," she told me during one of our weekly phone calls. "When they talk about casualties or deployments, he gets this look on his face. Like he's finally understanding that could have been you." It was me, Mom. For years. He just didn't care then. He cared. He just didn't know how to show it. He knew how to show it for Justin. He knew how to be proud of Justin's accomplishments, to brag about Justin's success. I was different because he needed me to be different. She didn't argue, which was acknowledgement enough. The family myth that I'd been the favored son, the one who didn't need support or recognition, was finally crumbling under the weight of obvious evidence to the contrary. I'd built a life that didn't depend on their approval. The veterans group had become a second family, men who understood the bonds forged in combat and the difficulty of maintaining those bonds in civilian life. My relationship with Sarah had deepened into something serious and sustaining. My volunteer work at the hospital gave me purpose that had nothing to do with earning anyone's respect. When Justin's deployment ended and he prepared to return home, I felt nothing like anticipation. No excitement, no anxiety, no hope for reconciliation. Just a mild curiosity about who he'd become and whether that person would be worth knowing. The homecoming was small, family only. I wasn't invited, which was fine with me. I heard about it secondhand from Mom, who described a Justin who was quieter, more serious, marked by experiences that had aged him beyond his years. "He asks about you," she said. "Wants to know if you'll see him." "What did you tell him?" "That it's your decision." It was. For the first time in our relationship, I held all the power. Justin needed my forgiveness, my acceptance, my willingness to rebuild what he'd destroyed. I needed nothing from him. The request came through Mom, as I'd expected. Justin wanted to meet, to talk, to try to repair what had been broken between us. Not at the family home, where old patterns might reassert themselves, but on neutral ground. A coffee shop downtown, public but private enough for honest conversation. I agreed, partly out of curiosity and partly because refusal would have felt petty. I'd made my point. Justin had learned his lesson. There was no need for continued cruelty. He was waiting when I arrived, 20 minutes early and obviously nervous. The changes were immediately apparent. Weight loss, new lines around his eyes, a stillness that hadn't been there before. He looked like what he'd become, a combat veteran, someone who'd seen things that changed how they moved through the world. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat down across from him. "You look different." "I am different." He studied my face as if trying to read my mood. "I understand things now that I didn't understand before. Such as what it costs to be responsible for other people's lives. Such as what it means to make decisions when failure means people don't come home. Such as why those medals weren't just pieces of metal." I nodded, but didn't respond. This was his conversation to lead. "I know you'll probably never forgive me," he continued. "I know I can't undo what I did, can't take back the things I said. But I need you to know that I understand now. I understand what you sacrificed, what you achieved, what you carried. I understand why my dismissal of your service was so wrong." "Understanding isn't the same as choosing to see clearly," I said. "You had the same information before your deployment that you have now. You chose to interpret my service as weakness rather than strength." "You're right. I did choose that. I chose it because it made me feel better about my own decisions, my own limitations. I chose it because I needed you to be less than me." The honesty was unexpected and more affecting than I'd anticipated. This wasn't the Justin who'd thrown my medals in the trash, who'd called me a coward while our father laughed. This was someone who'd been forced to confront his own weaknesses and had found the courage to acknowledge them. "I became a soldier because of you," he said. "Not just because you arranged my deployment, but because I finally understood what being a soldier meant. The responsibility, the courage, the sacrifice. I wanted to be worthy of the uniform. And are you?" "I'm trying to be. Every day. It's harder than I thought it would be, but I'm trying." We sat in silence for a moment. Around us, the coffee shop hummed with normal civilian life, people complaining about work, discussing weekend plans, living in a world where the worst thing that might happen was traffic or a difficult boss. "I don't expect forgiveness," Justin said finally. "I don't expect us to go back to being brothers the way we were before. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I took from you, and I'm sorry." "What did you take from me?" "Your family's respect. The pride you should have had in your service. The support you deserved when you came home. I took all of that and threw it away because I was too small to see how big you'd become." It was the apology I'd needed to hear years earlier, delivered with the understanding that only shared experience could provide. But it came too late to restore what had been lost, too late to undo the damage that had been done to our relationship. "I appreciate the apology," I said. And I'm glad your deployment made you a better man. But understanding what you did wrong doesn't erase the fact that you did it. I know. You had a choice, Justin. Every time you dismissed my service, every time you made jokes about my medals, every time you supported Dad's narrative that I was weak, you chose to hurt me. Understanding why doesn't undo the hurt. No, it doesn't. So where does that leave us? He was quiet for a long time, staring into his untouched coffee. When he looked up, his eyes were clear and resigned. It leaves us as two veterans who understand each other, but can't trust each other. It leaves us with respect, but not affection. It leaves us changed by the same experiences, but not connected by them. It was an accurate assessment. We'd both been transformed by military service, but we'd been transformed separately, by choices that had driven us apart rather than bringing us together. I can live with that, I said. So can I. We finished our coffee in comfortable silence, two men who'd found understanding too late to save their relationship, but not too late to end it with dignity. When we parted ways in the parking lot, we shook hands like the veterans we'd both become, with respect, recognition, and the acknowledgement that some wounds, once inflicted, never fully heal. The medals hang in my bedroom now, in the same shadow box Justin had emptied into the trash can 18 months earlier. They tell the story of courage under fire, of leadership in crisis, of sacrifice for principles larger than personal comfort. They're meaningful not because my family recognizes their worth, but because they represent choices I made when choice mattered most. Justin has his own medals now, earned through his own courage and sacrifice. We don't compare them or compete over their significance. We're both veterans, both men who've been tested and found adequate to the challenge. That's enough. Our father tries harder now, asks better questions, shows interest in military affairs that feels genuine rather than obligatory. He's learned to be proud of sons who chose service over safety, duty over comfort. It's too late to matter to our relationship, but it's not too late to matter to him. Mom still hopes for reconciliation, still believes that shared understanding should lead to renewed closeness. She doesn't understand that understanding can coexist with distance, that respect doesn't always restore affection. Some bridges, once burned, become permanent landmarks rather than passages to the past. I don't regret the choice I made. Justin needed to learn what service meant, needed to understand the weight of leadership and the cost of courage. He's become a better man for the experience, and I've become free of the need for his approval. The lesson wasn't about revenge or punishment or even justice in any conventional sense. It was about consequences, about the recognition that actions create reactions, that choices shape the world in ways that can't always be undone. Justin learned that dismissing someone's service has costs. Our father learned that pride delayed is pride denied. And I learned that family respect earned through force is different from family respect freely given, but it's respect nonetheless. We're all different people now, shaped by experiences that none of us would have chosen, but that all of us survived. We understand each other in ways we never did before, even if that understanding came too late to save what we'd once been to each other. The medals in my bedroom represent more than military service now. They represent the moment I stopped accepting disrespect, stopped apologizing for achievements earned through blood and sacrifice, stopped measuring my worth by the opinions of people who'd never been tested the way I'd been tested. They represent the day I chose myself over family approval, principle over peace, consequences over forgiveness. They represent the recognition that sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones who understand you least, and that understanding forced through experience is different from understanding offered through love. The shadow box sits on my dresser where I can see it every morning when I wake up. Not as a monument to past achievement, but as a reminder of lessons learned, prices paid, and choices made when choice was the only thing left. Justin and I are both veterans now. Both men who've learned what it means to serve something larger than ourselves. We understand each other in ways we never did before. We just understand each other from a distance that nothing, not apologies or time or shared experience, is likely to bridge. And I've made my peace with that. Some victories require losses that make the winning bittersweet. Some justice comes at the cost of relationships that can never be restored. Some medals represent not just courage in battle, but the courage to accept that some wounds, once inflicted, become permanent parts of who we are. The man who threw those medals in the trash is gone, replaced by someone who understands their weight. The man who laughed at his son's humiliation has learned to respect what he once dismissed. And the man who stood silent while his service was mocked has found his voice and used it to reshape the world around him. We're all different now. We're all better in our own ways. We're just not family anymore, not in any way that matters. And sometimes that's enough. That's my story. Your turn. Have you ever been disrespected by family for something you bled to earn? Did you hold the line or walk away? If someone apologized only after facing consequences, would you forgive them? Veterans, what's one thing you wish your family understood about service? What boundary are you setting this week? If this resonated, drop your thoughts below, share it with someone who needs it, and hit like/subscribe for more true stories about standing your ground.